Hey friends, Clint Hudson here, producer of the Unreached podcast. Today's episode requires a disclaimer. We're going to be heading to Myanmar and Thailand to have a conversation with our friend Ashlee Heiligman, who works for Global Child Advocates. Ashlee is going to give us some information to help us to better understand the plight of forced labor slavery and human trafficking that's happening in that area. We're going to touch on some sensitive subjects throughout the course of this episode, and we pray that it truly impacts you and helps you to understand how God is at work in some of the darkest places in the world. So let's jump into this conversation with Dustin and Ashlee now.
In Revelation 7, John shares his vision of heaven with members from every tribe, tongue, people, and language standing in the throne room before the Lamb. Yet today, there are still over 7,000 unreached people groups around the world. For the last 6 years, my family and friends have been on a journey to find, vet, and fund the task remaining. Come journey with us to the ends of the earth as we share the supernatural stories of God at work through the men and women He has called to reach the unreached. Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Unreached podcast. Dustin Elliott here with my friend Ashlee Heiligman with Global Child Advocates. GCA has been part of the Bless family and story almost since the beginning, going back 5-6 years now. We have done a lot of work together, focusing primarily on the Thailand-Myanmar border. And so I'm so happy to have you here today. Ashlee, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's been incredible to partner with the Bless Foundation and with all the different people that support you guys and just all the things that God has done through that partnership that did start back in 2018 is when we first were beneficiaries. And it just has been, it's blown up since then, honestly.
Your story and the story of your involvement with this part of the world started 10 years or so before that, right? Like back in 2009. You want to walk us through that?
Basically, I think, so growing up, I always thought missionaries were so amazing. I remember being in churches and hearing missionaries come and speak and just being blown away and really wondering why not everybody was signing up, just thinking it sounded like such an amazing adventure to go around the world. I loved Jesus from a very early age. And so I just thought that it was so phenomenal and wanted to do that when I got older. And of course, life happens. And, through high school and college, just had different distractions, but really had a heart for people and wanted to serve in some way. So I went into social work and kind of went that route and worked at different residential treatment centers, focused on child protection in my work, but really was kind of waiting around to get married. I was, after college thinking that I couldn't do missions or I couldn't do anything for the Lord as a single person and go overseas. And so was kind of waiting and just didn't have that happen according to my plan. And so I remember a friend of mine, one of my best friends, had done this missions program, and she said, you can still do that. And I was working for actually a consulting company at the time for various things, but I thought, no, there's no way. I have an apartment, I have a car, I have all this huge list. I had a list of about 20 things that would need to happen for me to be able to go overseas. And I also thought it was too good to be true. The idea of moving overseas and serving the Lord full time where someone else paid for you to do that seemed crazy to me, like that it was almost just too phenomenal, I guess. And so I had that list and I prayed about it, and the Lord did all of those things like so quickly, just bam, 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 all the things happened. And so I said yes, and I went to this missions program that was 3 months of training, and then you did an outreach, and my outreach was Thailand. Gosh, I remember the first time that I went to Thailand, I just was floored. I think the Lord broke my heart really quickly. And by that, I cried all the time. We went to a city that was called Pattaya. It was a city in the south of Thailand on the beach, but it wasn't a pretty beach, and it was just full of sex tourists. Like it was basically an entire city that was a red light district. And so I just, throughout the 3 months, God took me to different places in Thailand and just broke my heart, just tore me up. I remember just seeing young girls on the arm of white Western men from all over, from Europe, from America, from Australia. And they were just there for that purpose. And so I just remember being really torn up about it and asking God, what is this? Why am I so broken about this? But I just knew that He was calling me there.
There was one particular instance. There was a little girl that you saw that you kind of got to
see and know who she was. And then there was a comment that a guy made, and man, it just really rattled you.
Yeah.
But what it did was it spurred you into prayer.
Like I mentioned, God completely broke my heart for Thailand. And once you see those things, I couldn't unsee them. And I remember going home from that, the 3 months was over, and I didn't know what organization I would serve with. I just knew, and I was kind of looking into what everybody was doing and interviewed some organizations. And then this massive cyclone hit. It was Cyclone Nargis, and it hit Myanmar really hard. And I was at the Village Church at the time in North Texas, and they were taking a team of 5 people. They just said, hey, we have this water purification, which I know nothing about, but we have this system, this organization that does this, that wants to take 5 people from our church to go and live on people while also training them in this system. And so I was like, please, 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 please. And I remember calling them and just, praying about that. And they selected me to go. And we went to Thailand, we flew into Bangkok, but we went to the border because we were going to drive these systems in. So we were on the border in this city called Mesot. And right when we got there, news was put out that they weren't allowing any aid in, that Myanmar just was closed off to any sort of support. There were ships with aid on offshore that they were not allowing to come in and provide support for people that were hit by this horrible cyclone. We were on the border and they wouldn't let us in to provide support. We had these systems. So we were just waiting, and we were literally watching footage of just dead bodies. There were just all these images from the people we were going to partner with and support. And we were just getting these horrific images, and we couldn't do anything about it.
Oh, my gosh.
And so it was horrific. The Myanmar government let 130,000 people die because of this cyclone, whereas there could have been support just because there wasn't any kind of relief. And so it was really horrific situation. But I remember being in that little town, and we were staying in the DK hotel, I think, this hostel. And I remember there was this little girl that was begging in the market. She was begging along the street. She had a little boy on her hip, and she was about 10 years old from what I could tell, and just looked really poorly kept, didn't have the right, clothing, and also just seemed to have some bruises on her. There was just a lot of concern that I had for her. Her name was Ada, and I remember praying for her, but also trying to connect her to resources. And, my social work brain was, okay, who's helping? How can we resource for her? And how can we find out who's already here helping? But we bought her some clothes. We couldn't find an organization that was helping at the time. We were only there for about 5 days. And I just remember going home and being so heartbroken. And I remember the people who had provided support for us to go, I remember asking them to pray for Ada, just ask, I'm never going to see her again, but please pray that God will do something, that he'll intervene for this little girl with her brother was about 2 years old at the time. Randomly, but not randomly, I get this email from a girl who had done that missions program with me. She sent this update email, and I had no idea how she got my email. I had never emailed with her in the past. I just kind of an acquaintance. And it was this email that said, hey, everybody, just want to update you on what God's doing in my life right now. I'm living in Thailand, and I'm working with this organization, and we've just gone to the border town. We've been working with some street kids there and verified that there had been abuse in their family. And so we've just opened up a safe house for them.
Oh, wow.
And this was Mesot, the little town, the little border town I just spent 5 days in a few weeks earlier. And I wrote her back and I said, hey, Teek, I'd love to know, is the little girl's name Ada by chance? Do you guys have a little girl named Ada? And she wrote me back right away. Yeah, we've got Ada. We have Ada and her siblings. We have a sibling set that we've brought into our home. Yeah, God has been working in this situation the whole time.
Oh my gosh.
And it was so sweet of God to show me that he was working. And I knew that he was. I knew he would respond. I've always prayed for things, but for that to be such a direct picture of God intervening for something I had asked him to intervene for, knowing that he'd already lined all these things up. And so, I immediately emailed Teek and I said, okay, who are you working with?
Yeah, right.
What is this organization? I need to know. I've already felt called to work in Thailand. I need to be connected. This is it. I want to know. I'd been to Mesot, and she connected me with the organization, and from there it was kind of history. I mean, I sold all my stuff, raise support and moved to Mesa about a year later.
Yeah, that's what happens next. It's interesting if listeners have been listening through kind of the first season here. You see this two-way approach. Some folks figure out where they're going to go, like Ashlee did, where you had gone to a certain part of the world and you knew that's where you wanted to go. Some folks know they want to go. They don't know where they want to go yet, so they go to a sending agency and then they get trained, right? And then they figure out, okay, well, here's my situation. I'm married. I have 3 kids. That might make sense for you to be here, but not there, right? So just depending on what you're equipped with and what the need is, but there's different ways of getting there.
Yeah.
You knew where you were being called to go.
Right.
You just didn't know yet the mechanism or the tools or who to partner with and how that was going to play out. But then through this story, God let you meet this little girl, dislocated your heart for what was going on there. You're praying for her, and then you get this, I got to think of the Psalms, right? You get this just confirmation of your prayer almost instantly, like boom.
Right.
Yes. All right. I'm here. I'm working here. I hear you, Ashlee. I see you, Ashlee, and I have a plan for you.
Yeah.
And this is where it is. And you're like, okay, I'm in. I'm going.
Yeah.
So take us through what happened next. You sold your stuff. You moved over there, and here we go.
Yeah. I essentially so I've been with the organization for 14 years now, still with the same group. I was there. I lived in Thailand for 2 years, and during that time, I think God he just slowly exposed me to more and more of the darkness that is there. And through individual stories, through individual lives, just the brokenness of even rescuing someone and seeing what that looks like when you've got, 8 abused children in the same home together.
Right.
And all those dynamics. And as he was exposing me to things, I think the sweet part of his character is just continually showing me the solutions and how we can do better, constantly growing our organization to upskill, to build our capacity to really love these kids really well, to care for them well, to use best practice, to help them grow in every area of their lives rather than just, rescuing people out. It's a long journey of restoration. And so I think over the last 14 years, I think he's just continually exposed me to more and more and then just has provided those solutions. And so it's definitely been a journey. In my situation, I didn't go out to lead an organization. I didn't think of myself as ever running a large organization. And I think God has continually put situations in my path that have helped me grow in that ability to lead and helped me to trust him more. And so even as an organization where we've gone through different storms or we've gone through different difficult times, God has shown me specifically how walking and following the Proverbs and following what he says is wisdom in leadership, it's helped me to depend on him more and more in every situation. And so I lived in Thailand for, like I said, 2 years. I wasn't married when I went, but a childhood friend came to visit me who I've known all my life and just love his family. I had gone home to speak at a church, and he was there with his family just visiting and heard me speak and decided he wanted to come visit me. And so he came over and saw all the projects and we hit it off.
Way to go.
It was very clear that he was my guy. And so at the same time, my sister had adopted 2 children from Uganda. And I knew that I was praying about already coming home. I was in a situation where I was running a drop-in center for kids from the street, kids like Ida. I was running that center, and I had kind of a Burmese right-hand person who was translating and communicating also. I learned very quickly that what they actually needed was this massive team of Burmese nationals that were actually on the front line, that were loving kids, that loved the Lord, people that were serving in those communities that were really vulnerable. And so I knew that I needed to kind of get out of the way. I realized that God was using me there, but I felt like I could, every time that I would go back to the U.S. and talk about what we were doing, people would want to give and they'd want to support. And so quickly, all of my friends and family were supporting the work that we were doing. And I realized that it would be better for me to be in the States, raising funds, providing support, and promoting the work and then training up and making sure that we had people on the front lines in those really vulnerable communities that were well equipped. And so where we had been a really low resourced organization, I was able to then, God used our friends and family to really fund it so that it could thrive there on the border.
And there you go, presenting once again very perfectly for the listeners what it means to be a global Christian, right? And we can't all be goers. We can't all be senders. We can't all be prayers. We can also be welcomers, right? We can also be people that are equipping others. So there's multiple roles to play. And as Todd said in episode 1, right, the heart can't feel what the eye hadn't seen. You had gone, you had seen, you had experienced, you were equipped and ready. So when God did bring you back,
right,
yes, to get married and start a family, praise the Lord, right? But also to get back, because when you sat down and had coffee with somebody now, they were about to get an experience from you, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I've had coffee with you. You can feel it all over you when you're sharing these stories, and I'm sure people can hear it right now as they're listening to you. So it's easy to see why God put you in the situations He did, prepared you the way He did. As you said, not all those steps worked out in the timing you might have thought they would have gone in through your college and 20s and so on, but ultimately His timing was perfect. Okay, so now you're in the game. You've figured out what organization to join and be a part of. You've spent time in Thailand. You're raising resources. Now you've got to build out your team. So let's talk about, how did you go about building your team locally to serve there?
We recognized that we needed a larger team of Burmese nationals that could communicate directly first language with their own communities. These communities where we work are just high risk for trafficking. So you have traffickers that are targeting kids in these families and offering a warm bed, 3 meals a day, saying, I'm going to provide educational opportunities, providing all these things into these communities. And so it became very clear that we need people on the front lines. We need people embedded into these communities, because at the same time, you have community members who have experienced all kinds of harassment from their own government, violence, oppression, that are terrified of authorities.
Right.
So they're not going to go to the police if a child goes missing. They're not going to go to the police if a child's being abused. So you need a middleman almost to be their advocate.
As you know, we're here to tell stories. And you've done a great job kind of opening us up to what got you started in the story. I think now everybody can kind of get a grasp of who the organization is and what you're there to do. You're there to work primarily with vulnerable children who are being trafficked, who are being sold a bill of goods and brought into a situation that they lose control over and they are now enslaved to and they can't earn their way out of, and it's horrible.
Right.
Walk us through a story of bringing a kid in. I know you've got a lot of success stories, but give us an example of what that would be like.
So essentially, because we're embedded into these communities, we really are a safe ally for people to call. We get often a lot of calls. We have kind of a crisis hotline, but then also they have our cell numbers. And so our staff are constantly brought in on cases. And so whether that's from a community member who's seen something or they've identified a red flag that we've helped them look for, or whether it's a government child welfare worker who is, has a case on their desk that they need to figure out a placement for. So we kind of get referrals from all different places and from other organizations as well. Responding to that is very much, we want to work in collaboration with the local partners. So there's a local child protection network that we work within. But whenever GCA is the best fit for a situation, we typically respond ideally trying to help children grow up in a family. So if a family is possible, if we're able to find a safe family member that did not contribute, then we're able to help kids go be supported, because that's where they can really find the most healing, is through that support, and we can help strengthen that family for them. But then we definitely have situations where there's just not, particularly if it has happened within Myanmar and they've come across the border, quite often it's really difficult to trace a family member, especially with documentation issues and all of that. And so we have an emergency shelter. So a shelter where we have girls that come in that have been through trafficking or they've been through exploitation and abuse. And so the stories, like I said, it's a long journey. It's not, I think quite often we talk about trafficking and rescues and it seems very helicopterish and, run in and save, and then everything's great and it's beautiful and it's good. But if you think about the trauma that they've experienced and the aftermath and how that impacts every single aspect of their life and the way they view the world. So even before this podcast, I was thinking through, and I knew this was about Unreached and miracles and the miraculous and seeing God, all the things He's done. And I think the thing that He was showing me is how much, while I haven't seen the blind see or the lame physically walk, like prayed for them and then they got up and walked, we have seen that so much in individual lives of just complete total transformation where they literally cannot see the next step forward, or they literally cannot do anything for themselves or walk their next step. and then encounter Jesus, and we see transformation, and we see that they can actually conceptualize and even forgive their perpetrator, which is, it's so hard to conceptualize from the outside looking in. But in particular, we had 2 girls that had been both abused by their father and then from there trafficked to several different places in Myanmar and exploited. And when they came into our care, they just had everything, all of the symptoms of abuse and exploitation from what they had experienced. And even our girls didn't want to be around them. They were not likable. They were not hygienic. They had all the things that were symptomatic of just the trauma that they had experienced. And so, for years, it was a really hard road with them. Then over and over, our team has become so much more evangelistic over the years. Like the more cases that they work, they've always shared about Jesus. They've always talked about who he is, but it's become more and more like, you have to know this. You have to understand, because this is where you're going to find healing. Because we find that when girls don't have a realization of that, it's just so much harder to help them to see differently. And so
your identity is not in who you were. It's not in who that person that took advantage of you made you feel like you are. It's not wrapped up in that. Your identity is in Jesus, who loves you and values you beyond your possible beliefs right now, right? And to get them to have that hope and that shift and that spiritual transformation, as you say. And we talk about this all the time. Jesus meets the physical need and the spiritual need. But in this case, I think a lot of times biblically, like he would address the spiritual need first when the crowd really wanted him to see the physical first. But in this case, it sounds like without addressing the spiritual, the physical has a really hard time getting there.
The bitterness can take root of, why did this happen to me? Why was I the victim of this situation?
Absolutely.
And so without understanding that God is going to work it all for good, and it is horrific, and it is not acknowledging that they have suffered greatly and that that this is not right, that this should not have happened to you. But then being able to see past it, that there is hope, that some point I'm going to see where God is using this in my life and how this is a part of the story that he's writing and why that story is valuable. And if you don't understand that, it can be so overwhelming to get consumed by remaining as the victim and never coming out as a survivor.
Let's talk about the other side. There is a survivor side to this. There are happy endings to a lot of these stories. A lot of what you do after the initial phases are you start to give them a training and equipping for a career, right? For a way to take care of themselves. I think a lot of these folks end up staying in the business kind of, right? Because it's happened to them, so now they want to go save others. But then some as well, like tell us about Sojourn Studio and other things that y'all have put together on the Next Step side.
Sojourn has been a phenomenal program for girls that have come out of our shelter program, because we launched it in 2017 because we were able to help girls out of situations, help single moms, help women that were being exploited or abused, and in those kind of situations. We were able to get them out of a situation, but we didn't have great ways to empower them forward. And so really knew that social enterprise, knew that dignified income opportunities and income generation is what was needed. But as a social worker, I just didn't know how to make that happen. So I had lots of ideas, and the Lord really brought the right people together at the right time. And so Sojourn Studio has been such a huge success, and it's completely Jesus, like completely the Lord. So there was a woman who was already looking to work with us and serve with us in Thailand who had a pottery background. And we had been in conversations. At the same time, I was connected to a woman here in Austin, Texas, who is an artist with Remnant Studios. Her name is Quinn Smith, and she had a passion. She was giving all of her profits to anti-trafficking organizations. So she had started supporting us. This potter was coming, and we knew we wanted to have a social enterprise. And so God just put it all together, and Quinn went over to Thailand. Her skill set was porcelain, ceramic jewelry. At the same time that Sarah came from China, Quinn went over to Thailand and trained all of our artisans in porcelain. It's this bone china jewelry that is gorgeous. So it's like a fair trade product that is actually really beautiful.
Right.
And sometimes that's not always the case. Quinn also knew Jessica Honegger from Noonday. And at the same time, Noonday decided to partner with us when we were brand new. And it has completely blown up from there. We started meeting in a carport at the beginnings. And literally, I mean, there's rainy season, there's hot season. It was dusty. We did everything we could to make it a good environment for the girls. But they loved being there. It was just this fun community and very loud. They would sing while they make the jewelry and all of that. But then when Noonday partnered with us, our profits skyrocketed. And we were able to build a professional studio. I was just there last month, and it's gorgeous and runs like a well-oiled machine. And we continue to fill orders for Noonday, and then we also sell private labels. I mean, we sell retail and wholesale as well to other partners. But that has been such a God thing that has allowed us to give opportunity to women because, like you said, they come, even the day artisans that we have, because they are so successful and they have such a high production rate, we're able to then also offer this apprentice program,
right,
which is for girls that have come out of our center. And so they meet less, they meet more part-time, but it's more of a program where we have a curriculum that we run through with them that is talking all about life skills, about online safety, about hygiene, all the different things that sometimes when they come out of these situations, they need tangible lessons on. And so they come for the program and quite often sojourn because they're working with the clay. It almost becomes a form of art therapy where they wouldn't maybe open up in a counseling session. They will talk across the table with girls that have experienced similar things with their social worker nearby or their, the director close by where they can get some constructive feedback. So it's a really beautiful program that I've been so blessed by to be a part of.
There's a story on your website called They Are My Dream Family. Will you tell us that story?
Yeah. So we have a little boy that had grown up. We had an infant home. So essentially we opened that first safe house. And then because we were offering that service in this area of such high need, we started getting all these referrals and calls. So it quickly turned into 4 homes and never had the intention of running children's homes, but it just started to happen. And there wasn't foster care. There wasn't adoption. We didn't know kind of how else to respond. And so we had opened an infant home and had about, I guess, a total of 9 kids at any given time, because it was such, high needs. After we transitioned, we kind of learned from other partners that we were able to transition into family-based care. And so we were able to we learned how to recruit families through the local church and really place children in families because we knew that they needed a family, not just like this shelter opportunity. And so we wanted them to have more of that family dynamic. And we placed all of the children into families except for just a handful that we hadn't found placements for. And this little boy, he has some special needs and is a little bit on the spectrum. He was one that we've had a placement before and it hadn't worked out. And so we had been talking there was one of our staff members that actually had felt like the Lord was leading him to take in this child, had been praying about it. He and his wife had been talking. They had biological kids, but they had been talking about it and praying about it. And so it was just really neat because the child already knew this staff member. And so, it's a delicate conversation to have of you're leaving this one caregiver and you're moving into a different family dynamic. And, how do you feel about that? And all of those conversations. But when that went down with this little boy, he just lit up. Yeah. And he said, "That's my dream family. I've always wanted to be in that family." And we had no idea, that was what he was thinking. Nobody ever asked him before which family he would pick, if he could pick any family, because that's a really hard question to ask a kid. And so that was just a blessing.
There's another story on your website called No Exit Strategy. And this is about a young mom who was married at a young age, but her husband had left and gone to work somewhere else. And she was worried that maybe he was living another life. And sure enough, unfortunately, she confirmed that he was, and he left her for another woman and basically just started another family. So here she is with their baby. And I think she was pregnant as well with another. Yeah. And now her options are gone. Right. And she showed up, right?
Yeah. This is a story that is so common to the work that we do. And I know in that situation, you have a mom that is completely desperate and doesn't realize the important role that she plays, maybe doesn't value herself, doesn't value her life, doesn't value what she contributes to her children. And a lot of what we do, and in that situation specifically, is help her realize that you are who God designed for this child, that God doesn't make mistakes. He didn't accidentally let you birth, have life conceive in your body. He doesn't make mistakes in that. And so we believe that God designed the family to be the best child protection. So what we did in that situation is we come alongside that mom and help her to realize how valuable she is and how perfectly designed she is for that child, how that child looks in her eyes, and that builds resilience in her child, that every single thing that she does during the day builds attachment and confidence and wholeness in her child, and it can't be replaced. It can't be replicated by any program. And so our biggest goal in that kind of dynamic is helping that mom recognize that I'm enough and that I can do this.
Right.
And we all need that. Every mom that you talk to will tell you that we need other people to tell us we can do this, that if we don't know what we're doing, that we can do it, that we're enough, and that we're who God designed for our children. And so in that situation, coming alongside that mom with even just starting out with physical support, so concrete support where we're providing dry food, where we're dropping off food every week or every month, and we're making sure she has what she needs to just stay mentally capable of caring for her kids and staying in the right mindset, nourishing her children. And then we're coming alongside with parenting training, support, calls. They call us all, call our staff all the time of just those questions that come up. Quite often we have migrant families that they've moved across the border and they don't have the support system that they had back at home, but they've had to move because their village was burned or their house was bombed or there was some sort of violence that was happening. And so they don't have that social network, but they'll move kind of out into the boondocks because they don't want to get arrested by the police. They don't want to be out being, they don't want to be visible. It's very different than the situation at our border because this is legitimately a war that is next door, that is the government killing their own people. And so it is a very violent, very unpredictable situation that's happening in Myanmar. And so you have people fleeing, looking for help. And so basically these moms quite often just don't have a social network or support. And so coming alongside them is really the best way because they are our best asset in protecting their children.
Tell us more about the physical location you're in. So if somebody's listening and they haven't looked up Thailand, Myanmar, they don't understand exactly what does it look like.
Yeah.
Because there is a war right next door.
Right.
And there's destruction and it's tough. It's not like they're coming in and checking into a hotel.
It's a mixture. So there's wealth and there's investment. So Thailand has put millions of dollars into investment on the border region. They've turned it into a major economic zone. So even when I lived there, what I saw this last time that I was just there a month ago was vastly different than what I experienced. It's getting bigger and darker.
Yeah.
And even across the border. So because Myanmar is so fractured, you have investors from all over, and I won't name countries. I don't think I should name countries on this podcast. Investors that are investing on the Myanmar side. There are 6 huge casinos that have just opened across the border that are now, it's almost like because Bangkok is an oversaturated market, they've moved the market to the border area. Right. And so this is a newer development that in the last 14 years, I haven't seen it be as bad as it is currently. I have more of an urgency right now than I have even in previous years. Wow. And for this region, that is saying a whole lot, honestly. These casinos are right across the border and they literally have steps that go down into the river. So people are coming across the border to use the services, the gambling and the prostitution there in the casinos. It's like a red light district right along the border on the Myanmar side. And because it's so fractured, they're able to operate without any kind of accountability or repercussion of any of the actions or any of the crime that is happening. So you have drug trafficking, human trafficking, every kind of exploitation happening right there along the borderline.
And it's all wrapped up in a big nice casino with a bunch of lights and dings and bells going off, and it looks like it's just normal life. It's just the way things go.
Right.
But the darkness happening at the bottom of those steps and across that river.
Yeah.
It's horrible.
The communities that we work in are more vulnerable than ever, and we haven't seen this trafficking. We haven't seen the movement into Myanmar. It's always been that Mesot has been a transit to a larger city to be exploited. Myanmar was always a source country for trafficking, and it seems like it's becoming more of a destination country on the border area. It is that the darkness is getting darker, and it makes me so grateful that our teams are there and that they're able to respond and that they're already viewed as a resource, like as an ally and a trusted partner with these communities. And so we've just opened up 2 new community centers, but we're looking at the third right along the border that are a resource for families to come in to learn about trafficking, to learn about the threats, to learn about how to protect their own children, and to just get support when they're in that crisis situation, like that story that you were just talking about.
Yeah, so that's a great segue. So as the situation on the ground is changing, both with the war and with the casinos and with the general man, that was a really profound statement that you thought that it was a source country. I hate that I even know what that means now, but a source country for trafficking. That's wow. But now it's becoming a destination for it because of the lack of oversight and government control, right? Because you can get away with a lot more there, maybe than even next door in Thailand and other places. And so that's kind of like, well, we don't even have to outsource them now. We could just do it here.
Right.
But with those new challenges, that means God's got to be continually revealing new solutions to you, which He has been doing.
Right.
So what's next? What does GCA do next?
Oh, that's such a great question. I think what is really neat is just that He had already put on our heart the last year, the year before, just these community-based centers. So we have already early childhood development programs. We have a large center that we have right next door to Sojourn Studio. And we have had community teams that are engaging in communities all over the region. And really, they're there as a resource. They're responding to crisis calls, to abuse reports, all of that, or trafficking reports, things like that. What we really felt called to was opening these community-based centers. And they're embedded into the community. So we purchased land. We just bought land at the beginning of June. We purchased it, and we're starting to build at the beginning of this next month. And so right now, it's basically just a roof, and we're going to be building a much larger structure, but we already have people that are walking from all over to come to these centers. And so it was really neat when we were just there to be able to just share with this community what it's for, to share who we are and what motivates our engagement with them, and just that these centers are for them and that they're a resource, that we would see that their kids are protected and safe.
Yeah, definitely. So prayers up for the centers. And obviously there's an opportunity, if anybody listening that wants to partner, you can certainly help fund these and help equip these with the right resources that y'all need to take care of these kids. You've had it on your heart, or put on your heart, to expand and go beyond Myanmar, Thailand. And so you've also got a geographical change or shift happening where you want to take some of those solutions you've learned somewhere else. Where's that going?
Great question. So essentially, if I back up a little bit and say, when I first got into this work, I remember it was very much motivated in anti-trafficking. And what I thought that was rescue, immediate response, getting girls out. And what I've learned over the years is that what we strongly believe is that God's design for child protection is family. What we're doing in Mesot is going upriver and building up families to keep kids safe from getting into trafficking in the first place. In Tanzania, what we've then learned through that is that kids that are in children's homes are even higher, at a higher vulnerability rate for trafficking and exploitation, because they don't have a family that is supporting them, that is a resource and an advocate for them. And so we've found that those rates are really high. And so we're going even further upriver to see kids that have already been orphaned, that are growing up in children's homes, to see them grow up in families, so placing them into families. And so that's going to be done through, we have this phenomenal leader there named Atosia, who is working directly with other organizations that want to help their children grow up in families. And they're going to be basically helping those children's homes find families for the kids, connect, reunify children with their families if they have kinship carers, all those kind of resources, so that those kids can be saved. Because in Tanzania, when they age out at 18, they have to leave the facility.
Okay.
And so we've provided training already, initial training for 28 orphanages or children's homes that are like, we need a better solution. We need to figure out how to help these children have a long-term solution for their lives and grow up in a family. And so we're beginning those conversations of, how can we help you? We want to help. We want to be a support. And so that's a team of social workers there that are focused on that. We have really strong statistics here in the States for kids that have been rescued out of trafficking, and the reality of them having been, the percentages are so high of them having been in foster care or in the care of the state at some point. And so we know that there's a correlation there. And then we just don't have all the numbers internationally, but we know that it's not, do I care about the orphan or do I care about trafficking? It's the same kids.
Right.
It's those kids that are at risk for trafficking. And so that's where we're trying to help people. Even our tagline is reimagining child protection globally, because the systems have been broken for so long, and we've been kind of responding within a broken system. And so we're hoping to help we're working with government, we're working at the government level, and our director in Tanzania came from child welfare and social, from the government background. And so he's helping us to then connect in to help even shift how the entire system responds to children that are vulnerable. I think one of the things that God has shown me more recently is just in my role, we do communications, we create annual reports, all that kind of stuff. And so I see thousands of pictures every day. I just see, they're always uploading pictures of what's happening in the programs. And I think it can kind of seem like nameless faces. And then you're in light of all the darkness, it can get discouraging. But I think God has made it so clear to me that He is, as much as He pursues me on a daily basis and wants my heart and my attention, I know that He knows every single person in those pictures, that it's not just a sea of faces, but every single person in Mesat, in Tanzania, every kid that is growing up in a children's home that doesn't have a family, every single person that we engage with, that He knows every single thing about them and that He's pursuing them just as fiercely as He's pursuing me. And to me, that gives me so much hope and encouragement for even in the midst of where it's getting darker, that God is working so much behind the scenes. And there's so many things that I don't get an email about or I don't get a report of just ways that He is transforming lives in the midst of all of it.
So if you're listening today and your heart is broken as ours is for vulnerable children around the world and for the trafficking that's going on, and you want to be a part of just getting in there and mixing it up and changing the future for these kids, globalchildadvocates.org, right? And how else can people get in touch with and get updates and follow you?
Yeah, we're on Facebook and Instagram, and anyone can always email me at Ashlee@globalchildadvocates.org. So
perfect. Ashlee, would you pray for us on the way out?
Yeah, definitely. God, I just thank You so much for Your goodness. God, I thank You for how You allow us to be a part of what You're doing in the world. God, I thank You for all the things we don't understand and that we can just trust You in the midst of it. God, I thank You that You are constantly showing us that just following Your word and obeying it step by step and listening to the commandments and just even the instruction that You give us, that it will allow us to be used by You in a way that we can't even imagine. So God, I thank You for this podcast. I pray for each person listening, God, that You would just expand their heart for You. God, that they would see themselves in the story, that they would see themselves, and that they would ask You what next. And they would ask You what to do. I just thank You that You have people listening to all of this that are excited to see how You're moving where it can seem so dark. God, I thank You that You are always moving and that we can trust You in that. We love You. In Jesus' name, amen.
And amen. Thank you so much, my friend.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening to Unreached. Our sincere desire is that what you've heard today will cause you to see the mission of God differently and your role in it more clearly. If this adds value for you, and we hope it does, would you please rate and review the podcast wherever you listen? Also share with your family, your friends, your church, your life group, small group, D group, wherever you do life. And if you want to connect with us, find us on Instagram at Unreached Podcast or email us at unreachedpodcast@gmail.com.